For 10 years it was a silent sentinel, a machine doing thankless work in the void between worlds. The MAVEN spacecraft circled Mars, watching the slow, tragic death of a planet's atmosphere, atom by atom, year by year. Its data was a dry scientific eulogy for a world that once had rivers. Then, on October 2nd, 2025, it saw something it was never designed to see. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. For 4 precious hours, its cameras locked onto an intruder from the deep dark, an object designated 3, the Atlas, by astronomers. It captured the only close-range, high-resolution images humanity would ever get of an interstellar visitor. 42 hours later, MAVEN went silent. Forever. NASA called it a cascading system failure, a tragic coincidence. The data, they said, was corrupted, unrecoverable, but coincidence has its limits. In 8 days, on December 21st, 2025, 3I Atlas will pass closer to Earth than any confirmed object from beyond our solar system ever has. It will come within 3 times the distance of the Moon, moving at speeds that defy easy explanation. What did MAVEN see in those 4 hours that made someone somewhere decide that silence was preferable to truth? What is it about this visitor that has scientists whispering behind closed doors and governments suddenly very interested in the stars? This isn't just a story about a strange rock in space. This is a story about what happens when the unknown knocks on our door, and the lengths to which people might go to control the message. The timing is too perfect, the silence is too loud, and the object is all wrong. Before we descend into the shadows, let's understand what we're dealing with. Interstellar objects are cosmic ghosts, rare beyond measure. In all our history, we've only confirmed 2 before 3I Atlas. Oumuamua in 2017, that tumbling, cigar-shaped mystery that accelerated in ways that still cause arguments. Then Borisov in 2019, a more conventional comet that was almost a disappointment after the weirdness of its predecessor. Both came, were seen, and left, never to return. 3 Atlas is different. First spotted in March 2025 by asteroid survey telescopes, it was initially catalogued as just another near-Earth rock. Then the math was done. Its trajectory wasn't a closed ellipse belonging to our solar system. It was a hyperbola, an open curve screaming that it came from somewhere else, barreling in at over 40 kilometers per second. But unlike the others, which whipped around the sun and shot back into the deep, 3I Atlas is on a path that brings it uncomfortably, specifically close to us. A cosmic bullet with Earth in its sights, if not its target. Now, if you're as captivated by this mystery as we are, I want you to stay connected with us on this journey. Where are you watching from right now? What time is it in your corner of the world? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. And make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You need to be here when the next piece of this cosmic puzzle reveals itself, because this story is unfolding in real time. The official narrative from NASA is clean, simple, and maddening. Space is hard. Equipment fails. The Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution mission, MAVEN, had a good decade-long run. A software anomaly affected its high-gain antenna. Recovery efforts are ongoing. The loss of the 3I Atlas imagery is a tragic casualty of this routine failure. Move along. But that story fractures under the slightest pressure. MAVEN is a survivor. It weathered a solar storm in 2014 that should have fried its circuits. It operated through dust storms and decades of radiation. Its systems are built with redundancy upon redundancy. For it to suffer a total, unrecoverable failure precisely 42 hours after its most significant and unplanned observation in a decade requires either catastrophic bad luck or a different kind of catastrophe altogether. And there's another crack in the facade. MAVEN wasn't the only spacecraft watching from Mars that day. The European Space Agency's Mars Express orbiter also had 3I Atlas in its field of view. Mars Express did not go silent. It transmitted normally. Its data, we're told, shows nothing remarkable, a point of light. But ESA scientists have clammed up about detailed findings from that day. When asked, they defer to NASA. When asked if NASA has their data, they confirm it was shared immediately. When asked what NASA did with it, they stop answering. So we have 2 witnesses. One is permanently mute, the other is still talking but won't discuss what it saw. And the interstellar object keeps coming, now fewer than 9 days from its closest approach to our home planet. This brings us to the object itself, to the thing that shouldn't exist, at least not as it appears. Through Earth-based telescopes, 3i Atlas is a faint smudge. You need serious equipment just to see it, but that faintness is the first clue to its strangeness. Oumuamua was small and tumbling. Borisov was a proper comet spewing gas and dust. 3i Atlas is estimated to be about 600 meters across, the size of a small mountain, yet it shows no activity, no tail, no coma of gas, no outgassing at all. As it gets closer to the sun, heating up, it remains inert, cold and dark. This defies cometary physics. Comets are dirty snowballs. When the sun heats them, they sublimate, they create atmospheres, they become visibly active. Even rocky asteroids can release trapped gases. 3i Atlas does none of this. It is, for all appearances, a solid monolithic bullet, or something with a shell designed to withstand the sun. This is where professional astronomers get uncomfortable. No one wants to be the scientist who cries alien. So they propose alternatives: a refractory crust, exotic materials, a planetary fragment. But a crust would crack under thermal stress, a fragment would show scars, a history. Exotic materials are just a fancy way of saying we don't know. Then there's the rotation, or rather the lack of chaotic tumble. Most irregular chunks of rock spin wildly. Oumuamua tumbled end over end every 8 hours. 3i Atlas rotates with a stable, unwavering period of 23.93 hours. That number is suspiciously, unsettlingly close to Earth's 24-hour rotational day. A coincidence? The universe is vast and coincidences happen. But when you stack them, the lack of outgassing, the stable rotation, the perfect hyperbolic trajectory aimed at our neighbourhood, the weight of coincidence becomes a heavy burden for any simple explanation to bear. This is what MAVEN saw up close. Not a grainy dot from 1 billion kilometres away, but a detailed view, surface texture, thermal properties, the truth of its nature. Whatever distinguishing feature, be it crystalline structure, metallic sheen, or manufactured panels, would have been visible in those images, and all of it is gone, lost in a communications failure that struck at the single most consequential moment in the spacecraft's long career. You can choose to believe in spectacularly bad luck, or you can consider the alternative, that MAVEN didn't fail, that its data exists, locked in a server at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, that someone looked at what it found and made a decision. Not necessarily because they're hiding little green men. Maybe the truth is simply something the world isn't ready to hear. Maybe what's coming toward us requires a different kind of preparation than anyone wants to admit. The pattern of silence extends beyond Mars. There is a researcher at the SETI Institute, Dr. Elena Vasquez, who studies technosignatures. Unofficially, she's been monitoring 3i Atlas with equipment not exactly approved for personal projects. She won't go on record, but in trusted circles she speaks of a signal, a weak repeating pattern in the microwave spectrum centered at 1.42 GHz. That frequency is the emission line of neutral hydrogen, the most common element in the universe. It sits in the water hole, a quiet band of the radio spectrum that SETI scientists have long theorized would be ideal for interstellar communication. The signal from 3i Atlas repeats every 23.93 hours, synchronized with its rotation. Vasquez describes it as structured, with modulations too precise to be random noise. She filed a report through official channels in April. She received no response. Instead, her security clearance was flagged for review. She now finds herself locked out of databases, uninvited from meetings. When she asks why, she's told it's administrative processing. Others have encountered similar walls. Dr. James Chen at MIT got anomalous radar returns from 3i Atlas, echoes too strong for its size, suggesting either incredible darkness or something that amplifies radar. He wrote a paper. It was peer-reviewed, accepted for publication, then pulled without scientific cause. A team in South Africa detected brief gamma-ray emissions from the object's vicinity in July. Their announcement to the International Astronomical Union was delayed for verification until the emissions stopped, then published in obscurity. Individually, these are hiccups in the messy process of science. Together they form a pattern. Every time an independent researcher finds something anomalous about 3i Atlas, the information is suppressed, delayed, or the researcher is sidelined. Someone is curating the narrative. The question is not if. The question is why. This control extends to the history books, to the only precedent we have. The story of Oumuamua holds a shadow. While the public marveled at the first interstellar visitor, military tracking systems, designed for missiles and space debris, also observed it. Their data was immediately classified. Freedom of information requests were denied on national security grounds. To this day, what those sensors saw remains secret. If it was just confirmation of civilian data, why the secrecy? That pattern is repeating with terrifying fidelity. The United States Space Force operates a global network of radars and sensors for space domain awareness. They have been tracking 3I Atlas since its discovery. Their data is comprehensive, detailed, and utterly secret. NASA, as a civilian agency, works hand in glove with these military entities. The line is blurred. When a NASA scientist's observations intersect with classified Space Force data, they cannot publish. The public story becomes a filtered, curated version of reality. We are told what fits, and the rest is swallowed by the black hole of national security. This creates the perfect environment for a conspiracy not of evil, but of bureaucracy. No one needs to order a cover-up. You just create a system where sharing certain information carries professional cost, where questions are met with security reviews and stalled careers. People learn to self-censor. The truth becomes what is permissible to say. Inside the institutions, the atmosphere is tense, not among the public relations officers, but among the engineers and scientists who work with the data. An anonymous engineer at JPL described confusion around the MAVEN failure. The official explanation doesn't match the telemetry from the hours before the silence. There are gaps, periods where data should exist but doesn't. Some think it's an archiving error, others suspect manual deletion. If NASA wanted to hide the images, why not just classify them? They have the mechanism, unless the problem isn't just sensitivity, unless the images were so clear, so unambiguous, that simply restricting access wasn't enough. Maybe the source itself had to be discredited. A malfunctioning spacecraft produces corrupted data after all, data that can be dismissed if it ever leaks. This level of deception would require coordination across agencies, across international partners like the ESA. It would mean hundreds of people, each knowing only their small piece, following protocols, being good team players, and collectively, without a single darkroom meeting, they build a wall of silence around the truth. 5 days until closest approach, 5 days until 3I Atlas is so close that amateur astronomers with backyard telescopes will see it clearly. 5 days until the information embargo becomes impossible to maintain. Whatever is hidden in MAVEN's missing data, whatever truth lives in the classified servers and deleted signals, it is on a collision course with daylight. The object is coming, and when it arrives, we will all see it. The question is, will we be seeing just a rock, or will we be seeing the thing that changes everything? The silence from official channels is a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. In the absence of answers, the questions grow louder, sharper, more insistent. To understand why 3I Atlas triggers such unease, you have to move beyond the conspiracy and into the cold, hard physics of the thing itself. Because the object, by its very existence, mocks our understanding of what should be possible in the cosmos. It is an anomaly made manifest, a 600-meter testament to our ignorance. Let's strip away the speculation and look at what we can measure, or rather, what we cannot measure about it. Its strangeness isn't whispered in deleted files. It's shouted from the rooftops of orbital mechanics and spectroscopy for anyone with the training to hear. First, the trajectory. Mathematics is the one language that doesn't lie. The path of 3I Atlas through our solar system is a matter of public record, calculated from countless observations. When you reverse engineer that path, tracing its line backward over millennia to find its origin point, you arrive not at a star, not at a stellar nursery, but at a patch of empty darkness in the constellation Lyra, roughly 98 light-years away. There is nothing there. No star within 5 light-years of that point. Natural interstellar objects, rogue planets, ejected asteroids are gravitational shrapnel. They come from somewhere. They carry the signature of their violent birth, their trajectory pointing back to a source, a stellar system that flung them away. 3I Atlas appears to come from nowhere. It is as if it materialized in the interstellar void and began its journey. This alone is deeply odd, a statistical headache. Then comes the targeting. The galaxy is incomprehensibly vast. The sun is a pinprick. For a random interstellar object to not only enter our solar system, but to do so on a trajectory that brings it within 3 lunar distances of Earth, is an exercise in absurd improbability. Dr. Sarah Kim at Cornell ran the numbers. In a simulation of 10 million random interstellar objects entering from Lyra, only 63 passed within 10 million kilometers of Earth. The odds of one coming as close as 3I Atlas is scheduled to come are about 1 in 6,000. Not impossible, but unlikely. Deeply unlikely. And when that unlikely trajectory is your only notable feature, it's curious. When it's accompanied by a host of other anomalies, it becomes suspect. It begins to look less like a random rock and more like a carefully plotted course. If you wanted to visit our solar system to conduct a flyby of the inner planets, this is the kind of precision you would aim for. The efficiency is chilling. Now, the behavior. Velocity. 3I Atlas moves at a constant 41.7 kilometers per second relative to the Sun. That speed confirms its interstellar origin. It's too fast to be bound here. But the consistency is the problem. Natural objects, especially irregularly shaped ones, show tiny velocity fluctuations. As they rotate, presenting different surface areas to solar radiation pressure, they experience minuscule pushes and pulls. Oumuamua showed this. 3I Atlas does not. Its velocity is rock steady, as if it is perfectly spherical, or, more intriguingly, as if it is making tiny automatic corrections to maintain its prescribed speed. Comets make corrections naturally through outgassing. Jets of gas act like tiny thrusters. But 3I Atlas isn't outgassing. So what mechanism is smoothing out its flight? The only one that fits is active propulsion, the idea that somewhere within that dark, silent shell, a system occasionally fires to keep it perfectly on course. This leads to the most visually obvious anomaly, its appearance. Through the best ground-based telescopes, it is a point of light, a faint magnitude 14.6 smudge. But careful photometric measurements, tracking its brightness over time, reveal two critical facts. First, its light curve is remarkably flat. It doesn't brighten and dim in the chaotic pattern of a tumbling potato-shaped rock. It brightens and dims with a precise steady period of 23.93 hours, indicating a stable, controlled rotation around a single axis. Second, the amount of light it reflects, its albedo, is incredibly low. It is darker than charcoal. It absorbs nearly all sunlight that hits it. This explains why it's so faint for its size, but it creates another problem. What is it made of? Natural materials that dark are rare, usually the result of complex carbon chemistry or space weathering over eons. But for an object that isn't outgassing, that has no visible coma, such a dark surface is another puzzle. And then, the silence. The radio silence. Officially, the world's great radio telescopes, Green Bank, the Allen Telescope Array, Parkes, have detected nothing from 3I Atlas. The object is electromagnetically quiet, just a cold rock. This is the official story, but the unofficial story, whispered in the hallways of conferences and encrypted chat rooms, is different. It speaks of a signal at 1.42 GHz, the hydrogen line, so weak it dances at the very edge of detection. It speaks of a pattern repeating with the object's rotation. It speaks of a brief, powerful burst on September 9th that was captured by the Breakthrough Listen project at Green Bank. A burst that was logged, flagged by algorithms, and then thoroughly deleted from primary and backup servers before human eyes could analyze it. The deletion was not an accident. It required administrative privileges. Someone made that signal disappear. The question is, did they delete noise, or did they delete a message? This pattern of deletion, of suppression, forms a constellation of its own around 3I Atlas. It's not one incident, it's a methodology. Researchers who find something unusual find their security clearances flagged. Their papers are pulled after acceptance. Their data is classified as corrupted or in need of additional verification until the moment of interest passes. The atmosphere is not one of open inquiry, but of managed disclosure. The public narrative is being groomed, pruned of inconvenient branches. This isn't necessarily a malicious act. From an institutional perspective, it is risk management. If there is a non-zero chance that 3I Atlas is an artificial probe, the implications are civilization shaking. Releasing unverified, alarming data could trigger panic, market collapse, social unrest. The responsible thing, the bureaucratic thing, is to control the flow of information until you are certain, until you have a plan. But this paternalistic control has a cost. it erodes trust, and when the object itself will soon be visible to anyone with a decent telescope, that control is a ticking time bomb. Let's return to Mars, because the story of 3I Atlas is inextricably linked to the red planet in ways we are only beginning to grasp. MAVEN's mission was always about death, documenting the slow, billion-year stripping of a world's atmosphere. But in August of 2025, 2 months before it saw the interstellar visitor, MAVEN detected a different kind of mystery. On the night side of Mars, away from the Sun, the Martian ionosphere suddenly spiked. Electron density increased 20-fold in seconds, peaked for 12 minutes, and then gradually faded. It was a massive, unexplained atmospheric disturbance. NASA's official explanation, weeks later, was a data calibration error, a software glitch. Nothing really happened, except the UAE's HOPE orbiter, watching Mars from a different angle, detected the exact same disturbance at the exact same time. Two spacecraft do not experience identical complex instrument failures simultaneously. Something real happened in the Martian atmosphere that night, something energetic and localized. The UAE Space Agency, when asked, has neither confirmed nor denied NASA's explanation. They speak of ongoing analysis and international cooperation. Their silence is diplomatic but telling. 3 weeks after this ionospheric event, MAVEN's tracking software first flagged 3I Atlas as a distant point of interest. The connection might be nothing. Space is full of coincidences, but the sequence is provocative. An unexplained energy spike on Mars, then the detection of an anomalous interstellar object, then a perfect close-range observation of that object, followed by the spacecraft's permanent silence. It reads like chapters in a story where the plot is hidden. The mechanics of MAVEN's failure are where the official story truly frays. The spacecraft didn't go silent during its observation of 3 Atlas on October 2nd. It transmitted that data successfully. It went silent 42 hours later on October 4th. Safe mode, a protective state, is triggered by immediate threats, temperature spikes, power failures. A delayed entry suggests a slow degradation or a delayed command. October 4th was a quiet day in interplanetary space. No solar storms. But it was the day NASA's Deep Space Network uploaded a routine software patch to MAVEN. Telemetry confirmed the patch was received and installed successfully. 42 hours after that, MAVEN stopped talking. Software patches are tested relentlessly. They don't normally brick billion-dollar spacecraft. Unless the patch wasn't routine, unless it contained code that did something very specific under very specific conditions. Or unless it was designed to do exactly what it did, silence a witness. This is the paranoid interpretation. But as the pattern of suppression grows, paranoia begins to look like rationality. We are now left with a convergence, an object from the void with a perfect trajectory, unnatural stability, and electromagnetic whispers. A pattern of institutional secrecy that reaches across agencies and borders. A key witness, a hardy, decade-old spacecraft, suffering a fatal failure at the perfect moment to lose crucial data, and a clock ticking down to December 21st. Each piece alone is curious. Together they form a picture that is difficult to ignore. The simplest explanation is that we are witnessing a cascade of rare but natural events, mixed with human bureaucratic instinct. That 3I Atlas is a weird rock. MAVEN had bad luck, and governments are being overly cautious. This is still the most likely scenario, but the simplest explanation is not always the correct one. The alternative is that we are not the authors of this story. That 3I Atlas is a character with its own agenda, and the human response, the secrecy, the fear, the suppression, is just our first fumbling line in a dialogue we never expected to have. 4 days until closest approach. 4 days until the object is so near that its secrets, whatever they are, will be forced into the light. The pressure is building, and pressure, as they say, creates leaks. In the shadow of official silence, a parallel investigation was born. It was not authorized, not funded, and it existed in the spaces between encrypted messages, off-the-record conversations at scientific conferences, and privately shared servers. They called themselves the Atlas Working Group, though there was no official roster, no headquarters. Just 15 or 20 researchers across 6 countries, united by a shared conviction. The story of 3I Atlas was being carefully edited, and they intended to find the missing pages. They were not conspiracy theorists. They were astrophysicists, radio astronomers, planetary scientists. Their tool was not speculation, but data. And they were finding that the noise surrounding the object contained a very clear pattern, a pattern of suppression. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the city researcher whose security clearance had vanished into administrative limbo, was a de facto member. From her lab, operating on repurposed equipment and personal stubbornness, she continued to monitor 3i Atlas. The weak, repeating signal at 1.42 GHz was a constant companion. It was a carrier wave, a steady hum in the hydrogen band, modulated with faint, precise amplitude variations. It was the what, but not the why. She was convinced it was artificial, a beacon or a diagnostic signal. But without context, it was just an oddity. Her attempts to bring it to wider attention had been met with walls. Her experience was not unique. The working group began collating incidents, building a timeline not of the object's journey, but of the human response to it. They started with the military. Space Force tracking data was, of course, classified. But leaks from within the space traffic management community suggested the object had been on military radars long before its public discovery in March. Its trajectory had triggered internal alerts. It was categorized as a special interest object from day one. This wasn't censorship, just standard procedure for anything coming that close. But the classification meant that any civilian data that overlapped with military observations became sensitive by association. A scientist studying the object's trajectory might unknowingly be using data points that reveal the precision of Space Force tracking capabilities. Their paper could be blocked not to hide the object, but to hide the capability. Then came the academic gatekeeping. Dr. James Chen's radar paper was the prime example. Peer-reviewed and accepted, it was pulled by the journal editor citing nebulous data verification concerns. Chen's data was solid. He knew it. The editor, when pressed privately, admitted he'd received higher-level advice that publication might be premature. Not wrong, just premature. The South African gamma ray team faced a similar delay until their anomaly vanished. These weren't orders from a sinister agency. They were soft pressures, suggestions from senior colleagues, concerns about rocking the boat or ensuring certainty. In the conservative world of science, such pressures are often enough. The path of least resistance is to wait, to re-verify, to let the moment pass. The working group's most significant find was in the digital exhaust of the world's observatories. By comparing observation logs, they identified curious gaps. There were periods, sometimes hours long, when major telescopes like Keck or Gemini were scheduled to track 3i Atlas, but their public data archives showed nothing. The logs would list technical difficulties or atmospheric interference. Individually, this was normal. Collectively, across multiple world-class facilities on different continents, during clear skies it formed a suspicious cluster. It was as if during certain windows the official eyes looking at the object were deliberately closed. What was happening during those windows? Were the telescopes looking at something else? Or were they being fed different targeting instructions? The leaks from inside JPL about MAVEN were the most troubling. The confusion wasn't about if it failed, but how. The telemetry from its final days told a confusing story. Power levels were normal, temperatures were stable. The software patch uploaded on October 4th was a minor navigation update, vetted through all standard protocols. Yet, the data stream back to Earth showed anomalies in the command and data handling system before the antenna supposedly failed. It suggested the spacecraft was trying to execute commands that weren't in its regular schedule, or that its internal state was being misreported. Some engineers suspected a deep latent bug in the patch that created a conflict, causing the computer to endlessly loop and eventually corrupt its own operating system. Others, in hushed tones, wondered if the patch contained a hidden routine, a logic bomb triggered by a specific condition, perhaps the presence of a certain data file in its memory, a file containing the high-resolution images of 3i Atlas. Once the file was confirmed as stored and ready for transmission, the routine activated, inducing a fatal error that would look like natural decay. This was the nightmare scenario. Not just bad luck, but a deliberate kill switch. The working group documented all of this. Their collective file grew to over 200 pages of technical data, annotated timelines, and anonymized testimony. They were building a case, not for artificial origin, but for artificial suppression. Their theory was not that 3i Atlas was a spaceship, but that someone, somewhere in the chain of command, believed it might be and was acting to control the narrative until they could be sure. This person, or committee, existed at the intersection of NASA, the Department of Defense, and the intelligence community. Their motive wasn't malice, but a paternalistic, perhaps arrogant desire to manage humanity's reaction to first contact. They wanted to avoid panic, to have a prepared statement, a plan, before the public ever knew there was something to panic about. But their plan had a fatal flaw: the internet and the amateurs. As December 21st approached, the working group knew their window for quiet investigation was closing. Soon, 3 Atlas would be bright enough for anyone with a backyard telescope and a CCD camera to observe. The data would then be everywhere, on social media, in cloud repositories, impossible to recall or delete. The institutional gatekeepers would lose control. The group debated going public with their dossier before the approach to force transparency, but they hesitated. They were scientists. Releasing what amounted to an accusation of a cover-up without ironclad proof of the object's artificial nature could destroy their careers and brand them as cranks. They decided to wait, to watch the approach themselves, and to be ready to authenticate or debunk whatever happened in real time. Vasquez, however, was reaching a breaking point. The signal at 142 GHz was changing. In early December, as the object crossed the orbit of Mars and sped toward Earth, the carrier wave developed a new, subtle feature. Every 23.93 hours, precisely aligned with the object's rotational period, there was a minute but detectable spike in power. A pulse within the pulse. It was like a lighthouse beacon, flashing once per rotation. She ran analysis after analysis. The spikes were not random. Their slight variations in duration followed a pattern that looked algorithmic, not natural. It was a counter, or identifier. She became convinced it was a timer. She didn't know what it was counting down to, but the regularity was intentional. On December the 18th, 3 days before closest approach, the dam of amateur observation broke. A man in New Zealand named David Archer, using a 12-inch telescope in his Wellington backyard, posted a series of long exposure images to an astronomy forum. They showed 3i Atlas not as a point, but as a point surrounded by a faint hazy glow, a coma. The object was outgassing. The forum erupted. Within hours, amateurs from Australia, Chile and Japan confirmed it. They had images from the previous nights showing the same faint halo. 3i Atlas was active. It was releasing gas and dust like a comet. This contradicted every official observation for the past 9 months. Where was the professional confirmation? Why had no observatory announced this? Vasquez saw Archer's post and felt a jolt. She immediately checked her data from December 15th, the date of the earliest amateur halo image. There it was, a correlated spike in broadband radio noise across the microwave spectrum. It wasn't the structured 1.42 GHz signal. This was the hiss of ionized gas, the static of particles being excited. The timing was exact. The object had begun active outgassing, and her instruments had heard the electromagnetic sigh of the event. The professionals had to have seen this. They had to have data far more detailed than the amateurs. Their silence was now deafening and deliberate. Frustrated by the peer review wall and sensing the approaching moment of truth, Vasquez made a radical decision. She bypassed the journals, the agencies, the gatekeepers. She uploaded her entire raw dataset, weeks of radio observations, her analysis of the 1.42 GHz signal, the correlation with the visual outgassing, to an open-source scientific repository. She made it public with a simple note: "The data is what it is. Decide for yourselves." It was an act of scientific civil disobedience. Within hours, the Atlas Working Group and thousands of curious amateurs and professionals worldwide were sifting through her findings. The signal was real. The correlation was real. The object was undeniably, actively doing something. This was the trigger. The working group, seeing Vasquez's bravery and the complete lack of professional engagement, released their compiled dossier. They didn't send it to a newspaper, they posted it everywhere, on preprint servers, social media, file-sharing sites. The document, Observational Anomalies and Institutional Response to 3i Atlas, a timeline, went viral in the scientific community and then bled into the mainstream. It laid out in meticulous technical detail the pattern, The deleted signals, the pulled papers, the suspicious telescope outages, the contradictions in the MAVEN failure story. It didn't claim aliens, it claimed a cover-up, and it provided the receipts. NASA's response was swift and carefully crafted. They acknowledged the amateur observations of cometary activity, stating it was not unexpected as the object approached perihelion. They reiterated that MAVEN's failure was unrelated, a technical tragedy. They dismissed the leaked dossier as a compilation of unverified claims and circumstantial correlations, emphasizing that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which had not been provided. It was a masterclass in damage control, acknowledge the uncontroversial truth, the halo, deny the controversial implication, the cover-up, and appeal to scientific rigor. But for the first time, the official narrative was not the only one in the room. A credible, data-backed counter-narrative now existed in the wild. The genie was out of the bottle. The countdown was no longer just about orbital mechanics, it was about the impending collision between a controlled truth and an uncontrollable, crowdsourced reality. Conspiracy theories in the popular imagination are sleek, shadowy affairs. Men in dark rooms, coordinated plans, unambiguous evil. The reality is far more mundane, and in its mundanity, far more effective. The situation surrounding 3i Atlas was not born in a bunker, but in boardrooms and inboxes. It was a conspiracy not of malice, but of procedure, not of secrecy, but of classification, not of a single order, but of 1,000 small decisions made by people just following the rules. To understand how the truth about an interstellar visitor could be stifled, you must understand the architecture of modern science and security and how easily it can be used to build a prison for inconvenient facts. The chain of events likely began not with a scientist gasping at an image, but with an algorithm flagging a trajectory. When 3i Atlas was first calculated to be on a hyperbolic path with a close Earth approach, it automatically tripped protocols within both NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office and the US Space Force's Space Domain Awareness Network. It became a particle of interest, a designation that triggers shared data streams between civilian and military tracking systems. From that moment, every observation of the object existed in two worlds, the open world of science and the closed world of national security. The military's data, by default, is classified. Its very existence is often secret. So when a university telescope confirms an orbital parameter that the Space Force already knew with 10 times more precision, that civilian data point suddenly touches classified information. To publish it could reveal the capability that derived it. The solution isn't to order the scientists to stop, it's to have a security officer gently inform them that their manuscript contains potentially classified derivative information and must undergo a pre-publication review. The review takes months. The scientist, wanting to be a patriot and avoid legal trouble, complies. The momentum of discovery stalls. This was the engine of the silence. It wasn't that someone at the top said, "Hide the aliens." It was that the system, designed to protect secrets, automatically began to swallow anything related to the object. Dr. Vasquez's signal detection at 142 Gs, if it was real, it was a radio emission from a tracked object of interest. That's signals intelligence, SIGINT. Classification, secret. Her security clearance review wasn't punishment. It was a standard response to someone inadvertently brushing against a classified program. Dr. Chen's radar returns. If they revealed something about the object's material properties, and those properties were also being analysed by more advanced military radar, his paper could reveal what those advanced systems can see. Classification. Secret. The journal editor who pulled it likely got a quiet, official-sounding call from someone in the government liaison office, suggesting a voluntary delay for national security consultation. No threats, just a reminder of the editor's responsibilities. The MAVEN situation was the most complex node in this web. The images from October 2nd were initially just exciting science. But when they were downlinked to JPL, they would have been seen not only by the MAVEN science team, but also by mission security and planetary protection officers. If those images showed what we now suspect they showed, mechanical surfaces, geometric patterns, they would have triggered a cascade of protocols. First, planetary protection. Is this a potential biological contaminant? That elevates clearance levels. Second, defense. Does this represent a technological threat or advantage? That brings in the Defense Department. A meeting would have been called. Not a meeting about aliens, but a meeting about anomalous data with high consequence implications. The decision made in that room wouldn't be, destroy the spacecraft. It would be, this data requires validation and assessment before any public release to avoid public panic and international instability. Restrict access to the raw files. Prepare a holding statement about spacecraft issues while we figure this out. The software patch uploaded on October 4th becomes sinister only in this light. It was likely a real navigation patch, but it may have also contained a new hidden command protocol, a quarantine function. If the spacecraft's computer detected it was trying to transmit the restricted image files, it could invoke a failsafe, corrupt the transmission, then induce a safe mode that required ground intervention to fix. This would buy time. The failure wouldn't be permanent, it would be a deliberate interruption. The plan would be to eventually recover MAVEN, but only after the 3 Atlas flyby was over and a public narrative was established. What they didn't anticipate was that the failure would be total, perhaps due to an unforeseen bug in their own quarantine code. The spacecraft didn't just go to safe mode, it bricked itself. The cover-up created a real disaster, which then required a new cover-up to explain the first. This is how conspiracies snowball, not from perfect plans but from improvisation to fix the unexpected consequences of the first secret. The international dimension added another layer. The European Space Agency as a partner, but also a sovereign entity. When Mars Express also observed 3I Atlas, NASA would have immediately requested their data under existing sharing agreements. They would have also almost certainly shared their concerns about the data's nature under diplomatic channels. The message wouldn't be, we're hiding aliens. It would be, we have a developing situation with high national security sensitivity. We urge you to treat your data with discretion while we coordinate a joint assessment. For the ESA, the incentives align. Releasing earth-shattering news unilaterally could cause chaos. Cooperating with the larger partner, waiting for a coordinated response is the responsible diplomatic choice. So their scientists are told to delay publication, to refer questions to NASA. From the outside, it looks like complicity. From the inside, it's interagency cooperation. This bureaucratic conspiracy had a singular goal: to maintain control of the timeline. They needed to get past December 21st. If the object passed by without incident, they could then slowly release sanitized data, having avoided a global crisis. If it did something extraordinary, they would at least have had weeks to prepare a government response, rather than having 8 billion people watching a live feed with no context. Their mistake was underestimating the democratization of astronomy. They were prepared to manage the major observatories, the journals, the big science agencies. They were not prepared for David Archer in New Zealand or for the distributed, agile network of the Atlas Working Group. The old model of information control, gatekeeping at the institutional level, shatters when the phenomenon is visible to the public. You can't classify the night sky. By December 20th, the control was slipping through their fingers. The amateur images of the coma were everywhere. Vasquez's raw data was being analysed in real time by crowdsourced forums. The working group's dossier was a roadmap for journalists. The official stance shifted from silence to managed reassurance. NASA's statements now acknowledged the coma, but framed it as natural cometary activity. They began prepping the public for the flyby, emphasising the safety of the distance, the exciting science to be done. They were trying to steer the narrative back into the safe harbour of interesting astronomy. But the public, now sensitised by the cover-up allegations, was looking for more. The question in everyone's mind was no longer, will it hit us? But what are they not telling us? Inside the agencies, the mood was one of profound anxiety. The engineers trying to recover MAVEN were hitting dead ends, confused by the telemetry. The scientists sitting on unreleased data from Hubble and the James Webb Space Telescope were under immense pressure. They had seen the high-resolution spectra, the thermal maps. They knew, with a certainty the public did not, exactly how unnatural 3I Atlas was. They knew about the perfect spherical shape, the uniform surface temperature, the composition that didn't match any known comet or asteroid. They knew the eightfold symmetry of the outgassing jets wasn't natural, and they were forbidden from speaking. The dissonance was crushing. They were witnessing the most important discovery in human history, and their professional oath forced them to act as if it were just Tuesday. On the evening of December 20th, with 24 hours to go, the first concrete leak from inside the fortress appeared. An anonymous account on a science forum with credentials that checked out to other insiders posted a single line of text that went nuclear. JWST mid-IR data confirms artificial geometric surface features. Rotation is controlled. Outgassing is directional thrust. This is not a drill. It was followed by a 10-minute window before the post was deleted and the account banned, but it was enough. Screenshots spread at light speed. The phrase directional thrust moved the conversation from weird rock to spaceship in the public consciousness. The denials from official channels that followed sounded hollow, desperate. The dam was breaking. The bureaucrats had run out of time. Their carefully constructed narrative of coincidence and natural phenomenon was about to meet the reality visible in every amateur telescope. The conspiracy of bureaucracy was doomed not by exposure, but by the simple, unstoppable approach of an object that had its own story to tell. December the 20th, 2025, the night before, a peculiar quiet settled over the professional astronomical community, a silence so dense it felt like pressure. The great observatories were pointed, their data pipelines humming, but no press releases were issued, no live blogs updated. It was the silence of a held breath. Into this vacuum rushed a global, decentralized and passionately curious entity, the amateur astronomers. Unburdened by institutional review, funding dependencies or security clearances, they became the world's primary witnesses to the approach of 3i Atlas. This was their hour, and they seized it with both hands, turning the cosmic flyby into the first crowdsourced first contact event in history. The trigger had been the leaked Justy comment the night before. Directional thrust. Those two words transformed public interest from academic curiosity into a visceral shared experience. Online forums that were normally dedicated to imaging galaxies or tracking asteroids became war rooms. Observers from the southern hemisphere, where the object was best placed in the pre-dawn sky, became rock stars. Their live streams, often just a webcam pointed at a telescope eyepiece or a screen showing capture software, drew millions of viewers. People weren't just watching a dot, they were participating in a global vigil, a real-time detective story where the clue was a pixel moving against a field of static stars. David Archer's discovery of the coma had opened the floodgates. Now, with better equipment and longer exposures, the details grew stranger. The coma wasn't a symmetric cloud. High-quality images from Chile and South Africa showed it was lopsided, concentrated on one side of the object, streaming away in a distinct plume. To the trained eye, this was not the gentle, all-around sublimation of a dirty snowball. This was a jet, a vent. And as the hours ticked down, more observers began to report a shape within the haze. The central object wasn't a fuzzy point. In moments of exceptional atmospheric stability, it resolved into a distinct dark sphere. The small mountain estimate was wrong. It was smooth, almost perfectly round. The chatter on the forums grew more urgent, more technical. They discussed albedo, phase curves and reflectance. They were doing, in real time and without credentials, the science that was being withheld from them. Then came the radio amateurs. While the professional SETI dishes remained officially quiet, a global network of ham radio operators and satellite hobbyists turned their dishes and Yagi antennas toward the coordinates. The 1.42 GHz signal that Elena Vasquez had documented was now strong enough to be detected by sophisticated home equipment. Audio clips of the signal, a steady, pulsing hum, were posted online. It was eerie, otherworldly. People listened to it in headphones, trying to hear a pattern, a meaning in the static. More importantly, they began to notice the synchronization. Using Vasquez's public data as a guide, they confirmed the 23.93-hour rotational period and the micropulse that occurred with each rotation. They built citizen science apps to track it. The object was keeping time with itself with atomic clock precision. Natural rocks don't do that. The pressure from this bottom-up observation forced a fissure in the official wall. A mid-sized university observatory in Texas, perhaps feeling the strain of being asked to sit on history, released a data set. It was just photometry, brightness measurements over time, but it was professional grade. Their data confirmed everything the amateurs were seeing. The stable rotation period, the sudden increase in brightness correlating with coma formation, and a subtle but unmistakable change in the light curve shape that suggested the sphere was not uniformly dark. There were surface features with different reflectivity. The university offered no interpretation, just the numbers. It was an act of quiet rebellion. Within hours, other smaller institutions followed suit, releasing spectroscopic snippets that showed the coma's composition, Water vapour, carbon dioxide, methane. Standard comet stuff, but the release rates were all wrong. Too high, too sudden. This grassroots data avalanche created a new problem for the authorities: credibility. The official NASA feed was now lagging behind the public understanding. When NASA issued a statement at 1800 UTC on the 20th, confirming the coma and stating there was no collision risk, it was met not with relief, but with derision. The public wasn't worried about collision anymore. The comment sections filled with questions they wouldn't have known to ask a week before. Why is the rotation so stable? What causes the 1.42 GHz pulse? Why did the coma form so suddenly and asymmetrically? NASA's careful, fact-based statements now seemed evasive, a refusal to engage with the actual curiosities the object presented. It was in this environment that the final, most compelling amateur discovery unfolded. An imaging team in Namibia, using a remote-controlled telescope with a high-speed camera, captured a sequence of images over a 30-minute period. They were tracking the rotation, hoping to map the surface features. What they caught, in between two rotations, was a flicker. A brief, localized brightening on the object's surface, not reflected sunlight, but an emission from within. It lasted less than a second. They processed the frames, subtracting the background, enhancing contrast. The result, posted just after midnight UTC on December 21st, stopped the internet in its tracks. The brightening wasn't a point, it was a shape, a perfect glowing hexagon, etched onto the dark sphere before winking out. It was there for a single frame, a flash of impossible geometry. Pareidolia? A processing artifact? Maybe. But the team provided the raw data. Others downloaded it, processed it with different algorithms. The hexagon remained. It was small, maybe the size of a city block on that vast surface, but it was undeniably structured. This was not geology. This was iconography, engineering. The hexagon image broke the last vestiges of the weird rock narrative. On social media, in newsroom editorial meetings, in living rooms around the world, the conversation shifted definitively. The question was no longer, is it artificial, but what is it doing? The countdown to closest approach was no longer an astronomical event, it was an appointment, a rendezvous. The object was no longer an it. In the public mind, it became a they. In the control rooms of the world space agencies, a different kind of tension mounted. The amateurs had done what they could not. They had forced the issue into the open. There was no longer any point in holding back the professional data. The decision was made in those final hours to release everything after the closest approach, to try and reclaim the narrative as the authoritative source. But the authority had already shifted. The trust had migrated to the distributed network of observers who had been transparent from the start. When the history of this night was written, the professionals would be seen as the reluctant followers, not the leaders. As the final hours bled away, the sky itself became a theatre. In dark sky locations, people gathered, not at organised events, but spontaneously. They pointed binoculars and small telescopes toward the constellation where the object resided. They saw it not as a world-changing probe, but as a moving star, a traveller. There was a strange collective calm. The fear of the unknown had been replaced by a weary anticipation. The cover-up had exhausted everyone. The truth, whatever it was, would be a relief. Elena Vasquez in her lab monitored the signal. The 1.42 GHz carrier was still there, but the power was ramping up. The periodic micropulses were becoming sharper, more distinct. On her spectrometer, she saw new frequencies awakening around the central band, like harmonics. The object was powering up its transmitter, preparing for something. She didn't sleep. She just watched the scrolling data, a digital heartbeat from the void, growing stronger with each passing minute. High above, in the isolation of interplanetary space, 3i Atlas continued its silent, unwavering approach, unmoved by the panic, the secrecy, the wonder, or the vigil. It had a schedule written in the constants of physics, and it was keeping to it with inhuman precision. In less than 6 hours, it would reach its closest point to the blue-green world buzzing with so much noise, and then it would speak, not to the agencies, or the governments, or the scientists. It would speak to everyone. The amateur hour was ending. The moment of contact was about to begin. 613 UTC, December 21st, 2025. The moment of closest approach arrived with a whimper, not a bang. In tracking centres and on live streams, the dot representing 3i Atlas slid past its calculated point of minimum distance, 172,000 kilometres from Earth, and continued on its hyperbolic path. For 17 agonising minutes, nothing changed. The coma persisted. The steady 1.42 GHz signal hummed. A collective planet-sized sigh of relief seemed to emanate from humanity. Anticlimax. The skeptics began to nod. A weird rock. A very, very weird rock, but just a rock. The tension that had been building for weeks threatened to dissolve into bemused exhaustion. Then, at 6:30 UTC, the object performed its first impossible act. Between one data refresh and the next, the coma vanished, not dissipated. Vanished. Images from an observer in Australia at 6:29 UTC showed the familiar hazy plume. Images from Chile at 6:31 UTC showed a stark, crisp, dark sphere against the starfield. The outgassing had stopped instantly, as if a valve had been shut. The existing cloud of gas and dust continued to expand, drifting away, but no new material replenished it. The object had gone inert again, but this was not a return to its earlier state. This was a deliberate transition, a change of mode. The forums erupted in confusion, then in dawning realization. This was not natural. Comets don't just turn off. 60 seconds later, the radio silence ended, not with the familiar hum, but with a shout. A powerful broadband radio pulse erupted from the object, swamping receivers across the planet. It was a blast of raw energy spanning multiple frequencies, so intense it overloaded amateur equipment, leaving streaks of distortion on their recordings. The pulse lasted exactly 3 seconds. Silence. Then another 3-second pulse, and another. A perfect metronomic rhythm. 3 seconds on, 3 seconds off. This was not a signal hiding in noise. This was a signal designed to be heard, to be unmissable, cutting through the static of the universe with brute force. In her lab, Elena Vasquez's professional-grade equipment didn't overload. It captured the full spectrum blast. On her monitors, the signal wasn't just a bar of noise. It was structured, intricately modulated across different bands. Her hands trembled as she saved the files. This was it. The preamble, the attention signal. The 3-second pulses continued for exactly 5 minutes, a total of 50 bursts. Then they ceased. In the global radio silence that followed, every ear on the planet, metaphorical and literal, was straining. What came next was slower, clearer, and utterly unambiguous. The transmission shifted to a narrower band, still powerful, but now modulated with stark, simple on-off keying. Binary, the most fundamental building block of information theory, the first language any technological civilization would devise for long-distance communication, ones and zeros. The pulse length was standardized. The pattern was complex, repeating in long strings. Across the world, 1,000 decoding attempts began simultaneously. The first to crack it weren't government cryptographers, but a group of software engineers and amateur astronomers collaborating on an open-source Discord server. They recognized the binary wasn't representing text directly. It was too long, too repetitive. They tried interpreting it as coordinates. It worked. The transmission was a catalogue, a list of thousands of pairs of numbers. When passed as terrestrial latitude and longitude, they mapped to specific points on the surface of Earth. The precision was down to arc seconds. The list scrolled for 47 minutes, a relentless data dump of locations. People watched, mesmerized, as the numbers were translated and plotted on live updating world maps. The points appeared scattered across every continent, every ocean, with no immediately obvious pattern. Some landed in dense city centres, a street corner in Tokyo, a plaza in Berlin. Others were in the most remote places on Earth, the Central Sahara, the Antarctic ice sheet, the depths of the Pacific. There was no concentration, no preference for population or landmarks. It was a global sampler, a systematic grid thrown over the planet. Panic did not ensue. Instead, a profound and focused curiosity took hold. The transmission was not a threat. It was a task. It was a puzzle. And humanity, when presented with a puzzle, gets to work. Even as the coordinate transmission ended, people were already mobilizing. In Reykjavik, a group of students saw that one of the first coordinates landed in a field just outside the city. They jumped in a car armed with a phone GPS. In rural India, a village found a coordinate pointing to a nearby rice paddy and went to look. In Colorado, a hiker checked his map and realized a coordinate was on a trail he knew. He grabbed his jacket. This was happening in hundreds of places at once, documented on social media with hashtags and live streams. The world became a real-time scavenger hunt, orchestrated by a sender from the stars. For the first hour, the results were the same everywhere. Nothing. Empty fields, street corners, forest clearings, beach shores. People stood on the exact spots, filmed the dirt or the asphalt, and showed nothing. No markers, no artifacts, no hidden doors. A wave of disappointment began to crest. Was this it? A cosmic prank? A meaningless data dump? The anticlimax returned, heavier this time, laced with embarrassment. Then, the seismologists noticed. The first report came from the Icelandic Meteorological Office. Their sensitive seismic network, designed to monitor volcanoes and earthquakes, had detected an anomaly. At the exact moment of closest approach, 613 UTC, a specific station, the one nearest the coordinate the students had visited, began recording a continuous low-frequency vibration. Not an earthquake, a pure, steady oscillation at 40 Hz, barely at the threshold of detection. It was still ongoing. They checked other stations. Another near a different coordinate in Iceland showed the same signal, starting at the same instant. The signal was perfectly in phase. They contacted colleagues globally. Within 2 hours, the pattern was confirmed. Everywhere on the planet where there was a seismic monitor near a transmitted coordinate, the same signal was found. 40 Hz, starting at 613 UTC, coherent across vast distances. The vibrations were too faint to feel, but they were there, a planet-wide hum activated by the flyby. The coordinates weren't landing sites, they were resonance points. 3i Atlas had, in passing, somehow tapped the Earth at thousands of specific locations, setting it ringing like a bell struck in a precise pattern. The technology behind this was incomprehensible. It implied an ability to project energy, or a field that could interact with geology at a distance, with pinpoint accuracy, without causing any damage. It was a demonstration of control so fine it was indistinguishable from magic. As this realization dawned, the final phase of the transmission began. The object resumed its original 1.42 GHz carrier wave, but now it was pulse modulated again, this time in a new pattern. The amateur decoders, now working with the binary framework established by the coordinate transmission, had a key. They applied it. The new message wasn't numbers, it was linguistic. It began with a series of repeating basic pictograms, a star, a planet, a waveform, establishing a Rosetta Stone of simple concepts. Then it used those concepts to build sentences. The decoding was messy, iterative, and done live in public view, but the result was clear. The message repeated a simple phrase, translated into multiple linguistic structures that eventually resolved into human languages. It used the coordinate data as a reference to derive grammatical rules. First, it appeared in a mathematical symbolic language, then in what linguists identified as proto-symbolic constructs. Then, slowly, words emerged. English, we are here. Mandarin, woman zaijeli. Spanish, estamos aquí. Arabic, nahnu huna. Hindi, Russian, French, Swahili. The same 3 words, in the native syntax of Earth's major languages. It wasn't just a greeting, it was a demonstration. We heard your broadcasts. We mapped your world, we learned your languages, and we are announcing our presence. The planet did not scream, it did not riot. It exhaled, a soundless global exhalation of awe, terror, and profound relief. The question that had haunted the human psyche for millennia, are we alone, was answered. The answer was no. The message wasn't hostile, it wasn't benevolent, it was declarative, existential. We are here. The simplicity was devastating. Governments, caught utterly flat-footed, scrambled to respond. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session. Presidents and prime ministers appeared on television, their statements vetted by panic-stricken aides, urging calm, confirming the artificial origin of the object, and announcing that established protocols for extraterrestrial contact were being activated. The word alien was used sparingly, replaced by non-human intelligence, an extraterrestrial technological artifact. Meanwhile, 3i Atlas was already leaving. Having delivered its message and activated the planetary resonance, it began to accelerate. Not with a visible flare, but infrared telescopes picked it up. A focused point of heat on one hemisphere of the sphere, a propulsion system finally revealing itself. The acceleration was gentle but constant, adding velocity as it departed the inner solar system. It was not lingering, it had come, it had done what it came to do, and it was now exiting stage left. The entire active phase of the encounter, from the cessation of outgassing to the end of the multilingual message, lasted less than 3 hours. The visitor was efficient. As night fell across the hemispheres on December 21st, humanity was left in the aftermath of a storm that had changed the landscape of reality itself. The object was a receding dot, its mission apparently complete. The governments were speaking in careful platitudes, but on the ground at the resonance points people gathered, not in fear but in quiet wonder. They brought seismometers, headphones hooked to amplifiers to hear the 40 Hz tone converted to audio, a deep, subsonic thrum that was the planet's new heartbeat. They brought flowers, candles, signs. These coordinate points, minutes ago just random GPS entries, became spontaneous shrines to the new cosmos. The truth was no longer hidden in a server at JPL. It was vibrating in the ground beneath their feet and whispering in languages they understood from the empty sky. The cover-up was over, rendered obsolete by a message that was for everyone. The conspiracy of silence was broken not by a whistleblower, but by a hello. The days following December 21st were a study in cognitive whiplash. The world did not end, but the world that was ended. Humanity entered a strange collective processing period, oscillating between mundane routine and staggering existential realization. The initial global shockwave of contact settled into a deep, pervasive hum of adjustment, both metaphorical and now quite literal, given the 40 Hz resonance in the crust. The official machinery of governments and agencies, which had been geared for secrecy, now had to pivot violently toward transparency, a task for which it was grotesquely unsuited. The unravelling of the cover-up began not with confessions, but with the irresistible pressure of answered questions. First to fall was the story around MAVEN. With the artificial nature of 3i Atlas confirmed, the coincidental failure of the only spacecraft to get close-range images became untenable. On December 23rd, NASA held a press conference. It was a sombre, defensive affair. They released the full suite of MAVEN's October 2nd imagery. The world saw what the secret keepers had seen months earlier, a perfect dark grey sphere. But more than that, they saw the detail. The surface wasn't featureless. At the resolution MAVEN provided, it showed a texture, not rocky or cratered, but with a fine reticulated pattern like a carbon fibre weave or a matte finished alloy. Most damningly, in several images, the famous 8 panels were visible as faint geometric outlines, seams in the otherwise smooth hull. One image, taken at an oblique angle, showed what appeared to be a recessed area, a port or sensor array of unmistakably technical design. The NASA spokespeople offered mea culpas wrapped in justifications. Yes, the images suggested artificiality. Yes, this raised profound questions. The decision to withhold them was made under existing protocols for high-consequence anomalous data, out of an abundance of caution to verify findings and prevent social disruption. They admitted the failure of MAVEN was under review and that the timing was deeply unfortunate. They did not admit to sabotage. They offered the bureaucratic shield. Procedures were followed. The public and media reaction was a mix of anger and grim satisfaction. The dossier from the Atlas Working Group was vindicated on every major point. The researchers, from Elena Vasquez to the anonymous engineers, were hailed as heroes in some circles and traitors in others. The data deluge continued. The ESA, freed from its diplomatic holding pattern, released the Mars Express data. Their spectroscopic readings, taken simultaneously with MAVEN's visuals, contained the real shocker. They showed an absence. When analysing the sunlight reflected off 3 Atlas, they found none of the absorption lines typical of silicate rocks, metals, or ices. Instead, the spectrum was almost perfectly flat, with only the faintest hints of complex carbon polymers. It was the signature of a metamaterial, a manufactured substance engineered to absorb nearly all radiation across a wide band. This wasn't just a spaceship, it was coated in stealth material. Furthermore, their data detected an extremely faint but persistent infrared emission from the 8 panel locations, waste heat from internal systems. The object wasn't dead, it was powered, and had been the entire time running in a silent low-energy mode until its final approach. The scientific community, unleashed, began publishing at a frenetic pace. The trajectory analyses confirmed the guidance. The photometry confirmed the controlled rotation. Radar data from Arecibo's final days and other facilities showed the object was indeed largely hollow, with a dense outer shell surrounding a complex interior of baffles and chambers. Each paper was a nail in the coffin of the natural object theory. The debate in academic circles shifted dramatically from is it artificial to what is its purpose and who built it. The taboo Avi Loeb had faced with Oumuamua evaporated overnight. Conferences were hastily organised. Every relevant field from xenolinguistics to astroengineering suddenly found itself at the centre of human thought. Amid this, the civilian response was perhaps the most surprising element. The predicted waves of panic and religious upheaval did not materialise in any sustained way. There were pockets of alarm, doomsday cults gained some followers, and markets had a volatile week before stabilising. But the overarching reaction was a profound, species-wide sobering. The resonance points became focal points not of fear, but of pilgrimage and study. People brought instruments. Universities set up permanent monitoring stations. The vibrations continued, unchanging, a permanent new feature of Earth. Seismologists confirmed their coherence. A tap at one point in Canada was in perfect sync with a tap in Australia. The energy source was enigmatic, seemingly drawing on planetary stresses themselves or employing a physics we didn't understand. The resonators were not devices. They were modifications to the local geological matrix. This calm was partly because the visitor had left. The threat, perceived or real, had receded. 3. Atlas was now beyond the orbit of Mars, its propulsion still gently firing, its silhouette shrinking against the stars. It gave no further signals. Its work was done. This allowed for reflection instead of reaction. The dominant public sentiment was not, "What will they do to us?" but "What does this mean for us?" The message, "We are here," was passed endlessly. It was an observation, not an offer. It contained no requests, no threats, no promises, no technology blueprints. It was a statement of existence that implied observation. We were seen. We were known. We were interesting enough to visit, to scan, to speak to, and to mark. The political fallout was intense but orderly. Congressional hearings in the US and similar inquiries in other nations demanded to know who knew what and when. The role of the defense apparatus in classifying data came under fierce scrutiny. The argument of national security collapsed when the security in question was against global public awareness of an existential fact. A consensus emerged. A new framework was needed. The old protocols, designed for a hypothetical, were inadequate for reality. The UN Office for Outer Space Affairs found its moment, transforming from a backwater into the central hub for drafting international laws and communication strategies for future contact. The lesson learned was that secrecy had been counterproductive. It had created distrust and chaos where openness, though frightening, might have fostered unified preparation. For the individuals at the heart of the storm, lives were changed. Elena Vasquez became a global figure, her face on magazines, her data the foundation of a new field of xenocommunication studies. She used her platform not for fame, but to advocate for open science and a global SETI institute free from military classification. Dr. James Chen finally published his radar paper, now as a historic document. The Atlas Working Group, formally incorporated as the non-profit Atlas Initiative, dedicated to the monitoring of anomalous celestial objects and advocating for transparency in astroscience. They were no longer rebels, they were pioneers. And yet, beneath the surface of this new normal, deep unease persisted among those who looked deeper. The message was simple, but the technology was not. The gravity of what had been demonstrated was only slowly sinking in. 3i, Atlas, had crossed light years. It had navigated the solar system with precision that mocked our own orbital mechanics. It had scanned our planet in detail sufficient to learn languages and map geology. It had projected energy to create a planet-wide effect without destruction. It had communicated in a way designed for us to understand, and then it left. The sheer, effortless competence was humbling to the point of intimidation. They weren't gods, but their engineering was so advanced it created the same gulf. The question what comes next was now accompanied by a more disquieting one. When they decide to come back, Will it be as observers, or as something else? The universe was no longer a lonely, empty home. It was a neighbourhood. And we had just met a neighbour whose capabilities we could not fathom, who had, with a gentle but firm hand, rung our doorbell and walked away, leaving our house subtly, permanently changed. 3 weeks into the new year, 2026, the story of 3i Atlas was supposed to be transitioning from breaking news to textbook chapter. The scientific papers were being written, the political committees were meeting, the public was adapting. The object itself was a fading speck between Jupiter and Saturn. Then, a junior data analyst at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Rebecca Torres, found the ghost in the machine. Her discovery would reignite the firestorm, proving that the cover-up was deeper and the object's nature even more unsettling than anyone had dared to imagine. Torres was working on a routine archival project, organising old telemetry from the Mars orbiters. She had standard clearance, a carryover from her work on the InSight lander mission. In the chaotic reshuffling of priorities post-December 21st, no one had updated her access permissions. Out of casual curiosity, she pulled the file tree for MAVEN's October data. She was looking for the well-known observation blocks from the second, the ones now famous worldwide. But her eye was caught by the metadata tags. There were not 2 observation blocks logged for that day, as officially reported. There were 3. The third block was timestamped for October 3rd, approximately 16 hours after the close-range imaging session. It was a short observation, just 20 minutes. According to the mission logs, it was listed as a calibration follow-up. The raw image files were stored in a subdirectory with restricted access, a level above Torres's clearance. However, the automated processing pipeline had generated low-resolution thumbnails for all images for quick browsing, and these were in an open cache. Torres opened them. The thumbnails were grainy, but what they showed was unmistakable and utterly different from the smooth sphere the world had seen. In these images, taken half a Martian day after the first set, one of the 8 geometric panels on 3i Atlas was open, not ajar, fully deployed, like a flower petal or a spacecraft bay door. The interior was exposed, and it was not a natural cavity. The interior revealed structure, geometric, ordered. There were what appeared to be reinforcing ribs or beams, forming a hexagonal latticework. There were conduits, straight and purposeful. There were surfaces that were too flat, angles that were too sharp. And in the centre of the exposed section, a cluster of objects that reflected sunlight with the hard gleam of metal or composite. One shape was distinctly cylindrical, like a tank or a reactor housing. Another had a facetted, crystalline appearance. This was not the interior of an asteroid hollowed out. This was the interior of a constructed vehicle, a machine. The images were proof, not just of artificial origin, but of complex inhabited engineering. They showed the object's guts. Torres sat frozen at her terminal. This was the Rosetta Stone. This was what had been hidden. The first images showed a strange sphere. These images showed a ship. She followed protocol. She reported it to her immediate supervisor. The supervisor's face went pale. He made a call. Within an hour, Torres was in a secure meeting room with 2 men from NASA security and a senior mission director she'd never met. They were polite but firm. They confirmed the images were authentic. They explained that this data had been under a higher classification due to active analysis. They thanked her for her diligence and asked her to sign a non-disclosure agreement, citing national security. They assured her a formal announcement was being prepared. Torres, intimidated and wanting to keep her job, signed. But as she left, she saw the look in the mission director's eyes. It wasn't the look of someone planning an announcement. It was the look of someone containing a catastrophe. Torres went home, but she couldn't sleep. The weight of what she'd seen and the feeling of being complicit in a continuing lie crushed her. The next day, she reached out anonymously to a former colleague she knew was sympathetic to the Atlas initiative. She described the thumbnails. She didn't send the files, she knew that would be traced, but the description was enough. The information hit the initiative's network like a lightning bolt. They had suspected more was hidden, but this was confirmation. They used their growing public credibility to apply pressure. A science journalist, tipped off, filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the 3rd observation block. NASA stalled, citing the ongoing MAVEN failure review. But the seed was planted. The rumour that NASA still possessed earth-shattering images it was withholding began to circulate in the press. public pressure mounted. Congresspeople who had been on the receiving end of vague testimony suddenly demanded answers. Faced with a second-wave scandal that could destroy the agency's remaining credibility, NASA capitulated. On January 8, 2026, they released the third image set. The global reaction made the December 21st announcement seem quiet. The high-resolution images were staggering. The open bay was a masterpiece of alien engineering. The hexagonal lattice was not just support, it was a structural fractal repeating in smaller and smaller patterns, a design maximizing strength with minimal mass. The conduits were seamless, with no visible welds or bolts. The cylindrical object was surrounded by a web of smaller connections like a central power unit, and on several interior surfaces there were markings, symbols, not random scratches, but rows of consistent geometric characters, lines, dots, arcs in deliberate combinations, a written language, an owner's manual etched on the bulkhead. The scientific analysis that followed was frenzied. Material scientists estimated the tensile strength of the lattice based on its dimensions. Engineers debated the function of the central cylinder, fusion chamber, antimatter magnetic bottle, something beyond our physics. Linguists and cryptographers worldwide threw themselves at the symbols, the first potential example of extraterrestrial writing. The symbols didn't match any human system, but they exhibited patterns suggestive of a logical notation, perhaps mathematical or diagrammatic. More damaging for NASA was the obvious timeline. These images existed on October 3rd. The MAVEN failure occurred on October 4th. The sequence was now crystal clear. MAVEN took its first images. It took a second look hours later, and by sheer luck or because the object's rotation brought the panel into view, it captured the interior. That data was downlinked. Someone saw it. And the next day, MAVEN was rendered silent. The cover-up was no longer about cautious verification. It looked like active destruction of evidence to hide the full scope of the discovery. The coincidence argument finally died. The political and institutional reckoning was severe. The administrator of NASA was called before Congress and faced blistering condemnation from both parties. The agency's relationship with the Department of Defense was ordered to be reviewed, with new firewalls demanded to prevent scientific data from being militarized and classified without extreme transparent justification. Internationally, trust in US-led space science eroded. The ESA and other agencies began asserting more independence in their data release policies. For the public, the interior images changed the emotional texture of the encounter. Before, 3i Atlas was a probe, a machine. Seeing its interior made it tangible. It was built. It had parts, structure, writing. It was the product of a workshop, of minds and hands, or whatever equivalents. It was no longer an abstract they. It became a someone. The wonder was now tinged with a more intimate sense of connection, and a deeper unease. They had seen our world in detail. Now we'd seen, however briefly, a piece of theirs. The asymmetry was reduced, but the mystery deepened. What did the symbols say? What powered the cylinder? Why show us the smooth exterior first, and only by this accident reveal the interior? Was the opening of the panel itself an accident, a maintenance cycle, or was it, impossibly, a gesture? A deliberate show of transparency for the one witness close enough to see. Rebecca Torres was briefly hailed as a hero by transparency advocates, but her career at JPL became untenable. She was transferred to a mundane archival project. Her path for advancement effectively closed. She became a living lesson to other potential whistleblowers within the system. The message was clear: you might be right, but you will not be rewarded. The old guards of secrecy, though wounded, were not dead. The release of the interior images marked the true end of the first act of human contact. The visiting card had been presented. The hidden layer had been exposed both on the object and within our own institutions. Humanity now had two monumental tasks: to decode the physical and linguistic artifacts left behind, and to rebuild its own systems of discovery and governance to be worthy of a universe that was no longer silent. The visitor was gone, but the work, the real work of understanding what its arrival meant, was just beginning. The resonance in the ground was a constant reminder. The universe was speaking. We had to learn how to listen, and we had to decide how to answer. By February 2026, the immediate shock had metabolized into a permanent condition. 3i Atlas was a fact. Its legacy was not just in the images or the decoded message, but but in the planet itself. The 40 Hz resonance, once a curious anomaly, became the central focus of a new planet-wide science. It was the visitors' most lasting and puzzling artifact, a change made to Earth itself, subtle, omnipresent, and inexplicable. Investigating it became a grand collaborative project, one that finally broke down the remaining walls between secretive agencies and the global scientific community, because the phenomenon was literally under everyone's feet. The initial seismological data had been clear, a coherent global vibration triggered at the moment of closest approach. But as monitoring stations were hastily set up at hundreds of the coordinate sites, stranger properties emerged. Dr. Kenji Nakamura's team in Japan made the critical breakthrough. They had installed not just seismometers, but sensitive magnetometers at their local resonance points. They discovered a correlation. Each time the ground oscillated at 40 Hz, there was a corresponding minuscule fluctuation in the local magnetic field. The mechanical energy was coupled to electromagnetism. The Earth was not just humming, it was broadcasting. Further study revealed the mechanism, or at least its terrifying implication. The resonance wasn't just shaking dirt, it was inducing a precise quantum excitation in the crystalline structure of the bedrock at each point. This excitation, once initiated, was self-sustaining, drawing infinitesimal energy from background geothermal or tectonic stress. It was a perfect lossless oscillator. And as it oscillated, it generated an extremely low-frequency LF radio wave. Each site was a tiny, weak ELF transmitter, but there were over 10,000 sites, all oscillating in perfect phase across the globe. Collectively, they formed a phased array antenna of continental scale, broadcasting a coordinated signal into space. The content of that broadcast was decoded within weeks. It was not a complex message, it was a beacon, a lighthouse signal. The modulation on the ELF wave, when deciphered, transmitted the precise galactic coordinates of the solar system, using the same pulsar-based reference frame that was on the golden records of the Voyager probes. 3UJAS Atlas had not just said, "We are here," to us. It had, in effect, made Earth say, "We are here," to the galaxy. It had turned our planet into a signpost. The realization sent a fresh wave of existential anxiety through the global community. We were no longer a quiet, inconspicuous world. We were now actively announcing our presence on a frequency that could, in theory, be detected across hundreds of light years by anyone listening for such things. The visitor had, without asking, given us a cosmic megaphone. This revelation sparked the fiercest debate yet. Was this a gift or a violation? One school of thought, led by scientists like Elena Vasquez, argued it was an invitation. An advanced civilization was introducing us to the galactic community, giving us a detectable signature so others might find us. It was a coming-of-age present. The other school, favoured by many security experts and pessimists, saw it as tagging. It was a Kilroy was here, graffitied on our planet, potentially for others to follow, or worse, a predator marking prey. The truth was, there was no way to know the intent, only the effect. Earth's electromagnetic profile was now permanently altered. The scientific pursuit of understanding the resonance technology became an all-consuming endeavour. The phenomenon defied conventional materials science. The resonators weren't devices, they were a state imposed upon existing rock. It was as if the object had sung a specific note that caused the planet's crust to vibrate in sympathy, permanently. Research into quantum locking and coherent excitations in macroscale solids became the most funded field in physics overnight. The potential applications, if understood, were revolutionary. Lossless energy transmission, quantum computing stability, materials with perpetual motion at the atomic level. The visitor had left behind not a tool but a demonstration of a principle, a cliffhanger in a physics textbook we couldn't yet read. Socially and culturally, the resonance points evolved. They became known as echo sites. Some cultures built serene monuments around them, places of quiet contemplation of the cosmic. Others, like the Icelandic community near the first discovered site, built advanced research stations, welcoming scientists from across the world. Tourism was managed, often with a reverential tone. People came not to gawk, but to experience, to stand on a spot that was connected to thousands of others, all humming in unison, a tangible web of connection forged by an outside intelligence. It fostered a nascent sense of planetary identity. The divisions of nations and borders felt smaller under this shared, literally vibrating experience. In mid-February, a new transmission occurred. Not from Earth, but from the departing 3i Atlas. Now well beyond Jupiter, it sent a brief, powerful pulse back toward Earth, again at 142 GHz. It lasted 5 seconds. Analysis showed it was an acknowledgement signal, the kind sent to confirm receipt of a transmission. The timing was precise. It was a response to a set of tracking signals NASA had beamed toward it weeks earlier, the travel time for light explaining the delay. The object was still listening. The line of communication, though stretched across billions of kilometers, was still open. It was not a conversation, but it was a confirmation that the connection had not been severed. The probe was still aware, still processing. This ping back had a profound psychological effect. It meant the event wasn't truly over. The visitor was still out there, reporting perhaps. It lent weight to the idea that the echo sites were part of a long-term plan. The galaxy might now know of Earth, but the specific sender of the probe also knew we were here and was aware we had received its message. The relationship, such as it was bidirectional. Governments, meanwhile, struggled to formulate policy for a post-resonance world. Defense planners agonized over the impossibility of defending against a technology that could modify planetary geology from a distance. Diplomats worked on new articles for outer space treaties, covering non-human sentient artifacts and planetary modification. A new branch of the UN grew around the concept of xenodiplomacy. The focus shifted from hiding the truth to preparing for the potential consequences of the truth being known across the galaxy. The world began to invest in deep space monitoring as never before, not just for asteroids, but for answers, or for more visitors. For the average person, life resumed its normal rhythm, but with a changed backdrop. The existence of extraterrestrial intelligence became an accepted fact, like gravity. It filtered into art, education, religion. Children learned about 3i Atlas in school, alongside the moons of Jupiter. The great philosophical and theological discussions played out in media and houses of worship, gradually finding syntheses. The dominant human trait, adaptability, proved strongest. Fear diminished not because the unknown was gone, but because the unknown had shown itself, and the world had not ended. It had just become much, much stranger and more interesting. The resonant Earth was a constant low-level reminder that humanity was part of something infinitely larger. The hum in the ground was the sound of that new reality, a bass note to the future, waiting for the next chord to be played. March 2026. The initial frenzy was over. 3i Atlas was a speck of data receding toward the Oort cloud, its signature fading from all but the most powerful telescopes. The echo sites hummed their perpetual 40 Hz tone, a fact of geology. The political and scientific institutions had been shaken, reformed, and were now churning out analyses, protocols, and papers. Humanity had passed through the shock phase and settled into what could only be called a permanent state of conditioned wonder. The sky, once a tapestry of distant, indifferent lights, was now a theatre of possibility. Every unidentified dot, every anomalous signal carried the weight of what if. This was the new normal, a cosmos that was alive with potential intention. The scientific harvest from the encounter was vast and growing. The interior images had spawned 1,000 research threads. Material scientists published papers on the hypothetical metamaterial of the hull, dubbing it Atlas alloy, a substance with near-perfect absorption and strength-to-weight ratios that defied known chemistry. Engineers modelled the fractal interior lattice. Discovering its efficiency surpassed any human design for deep space radiation shielding and structural integrity. The symbols remained the holy grail. Linguists, aided by AI, had catalogued 247 distinct characters from the visible markings. They had found repeating sequences, what looked like numerical indicators, and possible schematic labels, but without a key, a referent. They were stuck. It was like having an ancient manuscript with no Rosetta Stone. The best guess was that it was technical notation, not a language, the schematics of the ship itself. The propulsion system was another enigma. Based on the observed acceleration and the faint infrared signature, physicists calculated the energy output. It was prodigious, but efficient. The consensus leaned toward matter-antimatter annihilation, contained by magnetic fields we could barely theorize, or a fusion process an order of magnitude more efficient than anything in our labs. The fact that it had accelerated continuously for months with no visible reaction, mass ejected after the initial coma venting, suggested a drive that manipulated inertia or space-time itself, a reactionless drive, the dream of interstellar travel. The visitor hadn't just travelled between stars, it had done so with an elegance and economy that framed our own chemical and ion rockets as primitive firecrackers. Socially, the long-term effects were subtle but deep. A generational divide opened, not of conflict but of perspective. Those who remembered the world before December 21st, 2025 carried a faint, persistent sense of dislocation, of living in a science fiction novel. The young, those for whom the resonance was a childhood background fact, absorbed it differently. To them, a universe teeming with intelligence was a default assumption, not a revelation. This shift in baseline worldview was perhaps the most profound change of all. It spawned a new wave of interest in STEM fields, not for weaponry or profit, but for connection. Astronomy and xenolinguistics applications skyrocketed. The goal was no longer just to understand the cosmos, but to prepare for a conversation. The Atlas Initiative, now a formal institute with branches on 3 continents, became the central clearinghouse for monitoring and analysis. They maintained a constant watch on 3i Atlas, tracking its fading signal.